the 11th month, which is the month Sebad, in the second year of Darius, came the word of the Lord unto Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo, the prophet, saying, I saw by night, and behold, a man riding upon a red horse, and he stood among the myrtle trees that were in the bottom, and behind him were their red horses speckled and white. And then said I, O my Lord, what are these? And the angel that talked with me said unto me, I will show thee what these be. And the man that stood among the myrtle trees answered and said, These are they whom the Lord sent to walk to and fro through the earth. And they answered the angel of the Lord that stood among the myrtle trees, and said, We have walked to and fro through the earth, and behold, all the earth sitteth still and is at rest. And then the angel of the Lord answered and said, O Lord of hosts, how long wilt thou not have mercy on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah, against which thou hast had indignation these 60 years? And the Lord answered the angel that talked with me with good words and comfortable words. And so the angel that communed with me said unto me, Cry thou, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I am jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with a great jealousy. And I am very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease. For I was but a little displeased, and they helped forward the affliction. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, I am returned to Jerusalem with mercies. My house shall be built in it, saith the Lord of hosts, and a line shall be stretched forth upon Jerusalem. Cry yet, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, My cities through prosperity shall yet be spread abroad, and the Lord shall yet comfort Zion, and shall yet choose Jerusalem. Now, as we've stated the last couple of weeks, the purpose of Zechariah's ministry was really hand in hand with that of Haggai. They just came about it from different perspectives. And so just like Haggai, he came along to help spur along the work of finishing the temple, to get the temple rebuilt. And Zechariah's emphasis then on his ministry was to give the people a sense of hope that would then aid them to be motivated to finish the temple. And so what we have here in verse 7, this is going to start a series of what is going to end up being 8 separate visions that Zechariah was given in one night. And so in one night he has these 8 separate visions, and there's these various visions, but they all kind of serve the same purpose. But what we're going to see is that these all have kind of an immediate and a future context to them, and this one most certainly does as well, as we'll talk about towards the end. Most of the things within this prophecy were at least partially fulfilled within a generation of Zechariah. Not within his lifetime, but within about 75 years of the time Zechariah gave this prophecy. But as we're going to see, its greater fulfillment will happen in the future, and that is very typical for the Old Testament prophets. And so again, this really builds into the hope that Zechariah was giving to the people, again, for the purposes of getting them to be stirred to finish the temple. And so let's just go through this together. Again, verse 7, he says, Upon the 24th day of the 11th month, it says the word of the Lord came into Zechariah. And the verse 8, I saw by night, and behold, a man riding upon a red horse, and he stood among the myrtle trees that were in the bottom, and behind him were their red horses speckled and white. And so this is the setting for the vision. And so the first vision concerns this man riding upon a red horse. Now, as is true with a lot of prophetic portions of Scripture, these things are highly debated, especially when you get into visions and things that are symbolic by nature. And so here, this is a symbolic thing that, he's really having this vision, but as far as what everything means, you're going to get 100 different interpretations. Here's who the man is. Here's what the horse represents. Here's what the colors represent. Here's what the myrtle trees represent. Here's what the bottom, or that word bottom there simply means a ravine or kind of a low, hollow point. And so, you get all these various interpretations for what each element of the vision means. And I will be the first to say, there is no element of a vision that God was given to one of his prophets that meant nothing. If he was giving them a vision, it was for a purpose. And so the man is important. The horse is important. He wouldn't show him a man riding on a red horse unless the color red is significant. Now, the problem that we get into is that by and large, now some of these things are answered for us, but by and large, they're not. And so we have to kind of use contextual clues, and sometimes we've got to turn to other portions of Scripture, and sometimes we just have to make inferences. But the last thing I want to do is stand up here and dogmatically say, here's why that horse was red, when the Scripture doesn't tell us. Now, we can make, again, I think, some educated guesses on this, but I just want to make that clear that when we go through this, I'm only going to be dogmatic about what we have interpreted for us, because I think that's the best way to approach this. And so, nevertheless, all that being said, and so you have this man sitting on a red horse, and then behind him are other horses who are a combination of, some of them were red also, some of them were speckled, which means they were red and white, and some of them were white. This particular man was standing amongst some myrtle trees, in the bottom is the way it's described, and some kind of hollow or ravine, something of that sort. And so he was in front of these other horses, and the insinuation there, I believe, would be that he was leading the other horses. If he's out in front, he's the leader. And so obviously many different guesses have been given as to the identity of this particular rider. But there are two that stand out. There are two that historically kind of been proposed for this. And the first one, and this is the more traditional Jewish interpretation, obviously, and that this is Michael. This is Michael the angel, and that Michael would be the one out in front of the other riders, who, again, would be other angels being led by the archangel Michael. But I agree with another interpretation that would say that this is a pre-incarnate Christ, that this is a pre-incarnate a picture of Christ upon this particular horse. Obviously, Jews aren't going to agree with that. But nevertheless, we see in verse 11 that this man is called the angel of the Lord. And in verse 11 and verse 12, he's called the angel of the Lord. And I am of the persuasion that the angel of the Lord is almost always a reference to the pre-incarnate Christ in the Old Testament. And so here we have, again, what I believe to be Christ upon this red horse. Now, color oftentimes has symbolic meaning. It does here, and we mentioned, I think, a couple of weeks ago in our introduction that the book of Zechariah has heavy influences upon John in the Revelation. And so this is very obviously similar, imagery to that of the four horsemen in Revelation chapter 6. And there the colors mean something, and I believe here the colors mean something as well. And typically in Scripture, red would be representative of blood. And so when you add together the fact that he's sitting on a horse and that horse is red, it seems to indicate, and I think it's pretty obvious, that this is pointing to warfare. So horses are oftentimes associated with warfare in the Old Testament. They were war animals. The typical animal that you would just ride if you were, trying to just get somewhere wouldn't be a horse. It would be a mule or a donkey. And so horses were typically used almost exclusively for working or for war. And so here, a horse plus red, again, I think should indicate to us some kind of war going on. And then you have the other horses, red, speckled, and white. And that seems to indicate a progression of war. And so you have the red horse indicating blood, and then you have red and white together, and then you have white horses, and white usually indicates some kind of victory or purity at the least. And so again, I think you have a victory indicated, that there was going to be war, battles, but ultimately a victory. Now, myrtle trees were very common, are still very commonplace in Israel. And here seem to, again, not dogmatic, but seem to stand as symbolic for Israel. So the myrtle trees here would be Israel, and then the bottom here, the hollow, the ravine, is a low place. And this one I'm not so sure about, but possibly representing the current low status of Israel. And so the myrtle trees and the man, they're in this low place. And that could, again, indicate their current status. Now, yes, they have returned, but they're still under the control of a foreign ruler. And so, they're still at a very low place nationalistically. So, now, again, it needs to be said that none of this is explicitly stated in the text. Right? None of this is explicitly stated, other than the fact that the writer is the angel of the Lord. And to that, I would say that indicates for us that this is Christ. Now, what you're going to see that is commonplace, not in all 8, but commonplace in these particular visions in Zechariah, and in a couple of other places, and in Ezekiel and in Daniel as well. For visions, there were given an angel to kind of guide the interpretation. Some people, in fact, refer to it as the interpreter angel. And so you see here in verse number 9, it says, "And then said I, O my Lord, what are these? And the angel that talked with me." And so the angel that talked with Zechariah would be kind of an interpreter angel. And I believe that to be separate from verse 10 and verse 11. I believe that the angel who talked with Zechariah is not the man on the horse. I believe that this is a separate thing. And so, again, this is maybe a little bit technical, but it's just kind of how I see this. And so this angel directs Zechariah to the man on the horse, who then answered. You know, he says, who are these, right? The verse number 9. Or what are these? And in verse number 10, or verse number 11, the angel of the Lord answers. He says, these are they whom the Lord hath sent to walk to and fro through the earth. And so this army of angels operates then as a sort of a patrol or a group of watchmen then. They're going to and fro throughout the earth looking for something. Now, what I would say then is this kind of the holy counterpart to Satan, right? So the scriptures in a couple of different places indicate Satan is walking through the earth, right? And Peter, he's a lion walking about seeking whom he may devour. The book of Job presents him as walking to and fro throughout the earth, you know, looking for trouble and that kind of thing. And so here this would be kind of the holy counterpart then to the prowling of Satan. And so they answer then the writer, and again, the writer is identified as the angel of the Lord. They answer the writer, and they say this, we have walked to and fro through the earth, and behold, all the earth sitteth still and is at rest. Now, at the time that Zechariah is writing this, you could say that most definitely in this part of the world, the part of the world that was really under the control at this point of Babylon, was at relative peace. And the reason they were at relative peace is because many uprisings had tried to come against Babylon, and Babylon had just crushed them all. And so, again, we're at a time of relative peace amongst the world. And this will come back. This will be significant in a moment. And so the angel of the Lord then turns to the Lord, and he asks a question. Verse 12, he says, then the angel of the Lord answered and said, O Lord of hosts, how long will thou not have mercy on Jerusalem? How long will you not have mercy on the cities of Judah, against which thou hast had indignation these 70 years? And so for 70 years now, the people of Judah, the people of Israel, have been under the control of a foreign leader. A significant portion of that in direct exile. And so the Israelites, they have come back to the land, right? They were granted the ability to come back and to begin to rebuild. They have come back. But again, they did not control their own fate here. They were still under the control, under the finger of now Darius. Now, a note on this particular verse. Here I'm going to quote Constable. He said, if the angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Christ, his activity here anticipates Jesus' role as intercessor for his people. Because that is exactly what the angel of the Lord does here. He's praying an intercessory prayer. He's praying on the behalf of another group of people. And I think, obviously, that's well and fitting with what Christ does. Christ intercedes for those, for his people. This is what he's doing now, right? Christ isn't just sitting back doing nothing. He's reigning at the right hand of the Father, but one of the things he is doing is he's interceding for his church. And so, again, I think this is well in keeping with the role of Christ and what Christ does for his people. And so one way or another, whether the angel of the Lord is pre-incarnate Christ or not, this was an intercessory prayer by the angel of the Lord on behalf of Israel. And so this angel, again, I believe Christ praying out, saying, how long, right? When is this going to end? And so God then, through the interpreting angel, and he kind of switches back, verse 13, and the Lord answered the angel that talked with me. Right, so we're kind of switching back and forth. And so through the interpreting angel, he answers with what he says are good words and comfortable words. Good and comforting words. Now this is really the theme, I guess you could say, of Zechariah. Giving these good and comfortable words, right, producing hope, giving the people hope for the job at hand, rebuilding the temple. And so essentially here's what he's saying. Things may not currently be what you want them to be, but hold on, because a better time is coming. Right? This is the essential message here. Things may not be right now what you expected when the exile had ended. Coming back to Israel, coming back to Judah, this may not be everything that you thought it would be, but hold on, because that time, it will come. And so his answer, and what he wanted Zechariah to proclaim then, because remember, he's a prophet, he's proclaiming here, was this: I am jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with a great jealousy. And so God here is proclaiming his jealous nature, and of course it doesn't have the negative context that we use with it, but he's proclaiming his jealousy for Jerusalem, his jealousy for his people. And so essentially what he means by that is God only desires Jerusalem's good. Right? When he's jealous for Jerusalem, that's what it means. He only desires Jerusalem's good. Now here's what that means. That means sometimes that necessitates blessing, and sometimes that necessitates judgment. Because I think sometimes when we think we only want what's good for a person, what we mean is I only want good things to happen to that person. No, ultimately, if I only want good for that person, sometimes that necessitates God judging them to teach them something, or God judging them to bring them up out of a position that they're in, God judging them so that they learn that that sin is not acceptable to God, whatever the case may be. And so here for Jerusalem, they had been judged, and that was part of God's plan, and all of it ultimately designed for her good, because one day, as we're going to see as we get further into the book, one day they're going to look on him whom they have pierced, and all Israel will come to know the Lord. And so, again, all of this is designed for the ultimate good of Jerusalem. Again, like I said, it might not be right now what you thought it would be, what you hoped it would be, but that time is coming. And so God is jealous for his people. God is jealous for Jerusalem. Now, he goes on to say this. He goes on to say, and I am very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease. Now, this calls us back to what, that patrol earlier. They're walking throughout the earth. At the end of verse 11, it said, behold, all the earth sitteth still and is at rest. This doesn't make God happy. This actually is an issue here. And so he says, I'm very sore displeased with the heathen that are at ease, that are at rest. He says, for I was but a little displeased, and they helped forward the affliction. What is that talking about? And so let me try to explain this a little bit. So when God decided to judge Israel, and of course we understand that wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. This was part of the eternal plan of God. But when God decided to judge Israel, obviously he could have done this in a myriad of ways, but the way that he chose to do it was to use a foreign power to come and destroy the nation. For the southern nations, for Judah, that was the nation of Babylon. The nation of Babylon came down and destroyed Judah, took them captive. But here's what God was saying: though it was the will of God, and it was the mandate of God for you to come do this, essentially here's what took place. They reveled in the destruction of God's people to a degree that became a sinful reveling. It was within the will of God for them to be that means of destruction, but then they took it further than they should have taken it. And so they went further in their hostility than they should have gone. I'll quote the prophet Isaiah here, speaking about Babylon. Isaiah writes this. He says, I was wroth with my people. I have polluted mine inheritance and given them into thine hand. Again, speaking about Babylon. But he says this, thou didst show them no mercy. Upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke. And so, in essence, again, these nations are sitting still. These nations are at ease, to use the word he uses here. But God is going to bring judgment against them, again, because he's jealous for Jerusalem. And because, again, even though they were the chosen means of God's judgment against Israel, they went farther than they should have gone. They went farther in their destruction. They went farther in their reaction. They rejoiced over the destruction of Israel. And what did God promise Abraham so many centuries before? God promised, I will bless them that bless you. I will curse them that curse you. Right? That was God's promise to Abraham. And so, I believe that promise is still standing strong. I believe that promise is still ongoing, and it most certainly was at this particular time. And so, yes, Babylon came down as the means of God's judgment, but it was sort of like what we read of in the Exodus with Moses, with Pharaoh, whereas Babylon was God's means of judgment against Israel. But that doesn't mean that Babylon loved Israel and wanted to bless Israel, but then God overturned their desires of blessing and said, no, instead of blessing, you're going to go destroy Israel. That was not the case. God used the already a negative and hateful heart of the Babylonians and to come against Israel. And so again, this is where God can judge that which was ordained by him. But even still, we see that they went further even in that they should have gone. And I hope I'm making that clear. But this is what it means there when he talks about he's unhappy that the world is at ease. Essentially, the world is at ease when my people are sitting in destruction. That shouldn't be. That shouldn't be is what he's saying, because I'm jealous for Jerusalem. And so he goes on, and this is really the hopeful portion here. And so he says in verse 16, he says, "Therefore, thus saith the Lord, I am returned to Jerusalem with mercies. My house shall be built. In it saith the Lord of hosts, and a line shall be stretched forth upon Jerusalem." He says, "Cry yet," speaking to Zechariah, saying, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, my cities through prosperity shall yet be spread abroad, and the Lord shall yet comfort Zion, and shall yet choose Jerusalem." Again, going back to what I said earlier, you're not at this moment what you think you should be, but hold on, because that time of prosperity, that time of blessing, it's coming. It awaits my people. And so he continues to promise blessing here. And so he promised to bring mercy back to Jerusalem. He promised that the temple would be rebuilt. And what we know is that 4 years after this, the reconstruction is going at this point, and in 4 years it will be complete. And so in 4 years from this date, the temple would be finished. He promised that the city would be rebuilt. That's what it means there when he says, "And a line shall be stretched forth." That word line there is a specific reference to a measuring line, right? And so he says that the measuring line shall be stretched forth upon Jerusalem. It shall grow. My people shall grow. And so the rebuilding of the city would take place. And in, I think it's 75 years after the time of Zechariah's prophecy here, the walls, Nehemiah would come back, and Nehemiah would get the walls rebuilt. And so all of these things that God is promising, again, they were on the horizon. Now I'm going to come back to that thought in just a moment. But furthermore, Zechariah was to proclaim, "My cities through prosperity, right, shall be spread abroad." And so the day was coming when they would be prosperous again. They hadn't been prosperous a long time. They were coming when they would be prosperous again. I'll quote Matthew Henry here. He said, "As they had been scattered and spread abroad through their calamities, so they should now be through their prosperity." There's a significant difference there. And then lastly, God promised comfort in that he would choose Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem was already God's chosen city, but here he shows that his favor is the point. His favor would return upon them. Right? His favor would return upon them. I would liken it to kind of the situation that we're in now. Right now, God has not rejected Israel. Now, obviously, this is my eschatological belief, but God has not rejected Israel. God has simply, at this particular time, shifted his focus to the Gentile. We're in the times of the Gentiles. God has shifted his focus over to the Gentiles. And when the rapture and the tribulation, when all that takes place, what's going to happen? God's going to shift his focus, his favor, if you will, back upon Israel. And amazing things are going to take place with Israel. God is not done with Israel yet. It will never be done with Israel, contrary to what a lot of other people might teach. Now, it becomes easy to see why God gave this particular vision to Zechariah at this time. Right, as we've been saying along, to help Israel see that God wasn't done with them, blessing was coming, all these things were on the horizon. And as I said at the beginning, you could say that all the blessings promised here were fulfilled within a generation, not Zechariah's, but in the next generation. But there is obviously a more perfect fulfillment to this. And we can say this honestly because the temple and the walls, they were rebuilt, but just like the first ones, they too fell. Right, in AD 70, right? It's such a significant date as far as biblical prophecy and all that is concerned. Yes, the temple was rebuilt, but in 70 AD it was torn down again. Jesus himself made the prophecy, right? There's not going to be one of these stones standing on top of another. And what happens a few decades later? The Romans came in and they did just that. They didn't just set fire to the temple, they destroyed it. They pushed the stones off the Temple Mount. You can go to Israel, to Jerusalem today, and see the remnants of exactly what Jesus prophesied would happen. It's there. And so, yes, the temple was rebuilt, but it too was destroyed. The walls were rebuilt. They too were destroyed. All of these things came to pass. That they became prosperous for a short time. But again, that was temporary. And so, yes, there was a temporary fulfillment of these prophecies, but I think you could say that the greatest fulfillment of them is something that is obviously still future. Unless you want to say that God meant by these prophecies only a short temporary period, which I don't think that's what God meant here. And so what these prophecies are awaiting as far as their greatest fulfillment is concerned is a time when Christ sits on the throne of David from Jerusalem, and Jerusalem then becomes that preeminent city that God is prophesying here in the book of Zechariah. So again, we see here hope most certainly given to the people, I mean, you could put yourself in their shoes, and you're thinking, what in the world, all this going on? We're not what we used to be. We're just coming out of exile, and we don't have the temple bells. All this stuff's going to... And so the prophet of God comes along and says, I understand things aren't what you had hoped, but let me give you some hope, right? That time is coming. Your God is not done with you yet. And so he comes along to give these, to receive and then proclaim these amazing visions that he was given. And so this is the first one. We have 7 more to look at, and that's not even all of the book, and there's still some more things to look at after that. So like I said, we're going to be in Zechariah for a while, not trying to move too quickly through this, but just some tremendous things to see here in the future.